Right then. It's a great time for an update. Well, howdy, everyone. Welcome once again to my little show here. My name is Roy. This is Escaping Dystopia, episode 69, dude. October 18th, 2018. Taking a bonesaw to the news, because that's what the news needs. Yeah, quite the week once again. You know those weeks that are like longer than weeks and more like month weeks? Got about 3 more month weeks left to go until we all get to talk about this with the voices. Actually, we got our ballots in the mail this week, so if you can do that kind of voting, I recommend you do it. And you don't have to worry about it no more. And you're already all voted up. And then good to go. Get my hair to do something more reasonable. Maybe? No. What else? So, what are we going to talk about tonight? Howdy! So, Spaceship Earth. And talk a little bit about maybe we should tax the churches. We'll do a bit on that here in a little bit. We have a new video, new segment this week. It's called This Week in Fascism. Because, why not, right? I mean, that's what happened. We'll talk about some of the things in fascism that happened this week. The Jamal Khashoggi murder. We'll talk a lot about that. So, some of the facts on the table here. We'll cut them into pieces. And I'm not going to make too many jokes about this. I joke because this is the horridness of this. We'll talk a little bit about the number of effects of this. But essentially what apparently happened is this guy is, and he's actually, I don't know too much about him. I couldn't identify his work without his name on top of it. But he was like the editor-in-chief of a number of large newspapers. So it's not like he was an unknown, just like some reporter out there. This was a known journalist and critic of the Saudi regime. And then he went to the embassy in Turkey and didn't ever come out. And so apparently at least the president has now admitted that it looks like he was murdered. The Turkish government is saying, yeah, he was murdered, cut up into pieces, and dead within minutes after he walked in the door. That's why this team of 15 people walked in. Here's some pictures of them. Oh, by the way, this guy is the crown prince's bodyguard, and this is another one is part of the intelligence service. These other 7 guys we've also identified, so we're not really sure what happened, but this guy over here is a forensic expert in doing this kind of stuff and recommends that you wear headphones when you do this kind of work. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. Fiscal year-end results. Our deficit was up by 17% this year. Can't imagine why. We'll talk about why. $777.9 billion. So the issue with it being up by 17% when the unemployment rate is at lower than it's been in my lifetime. We're looking at 50, 60-year lows. But the deficit keeps going up. So I'm not... I don't know how many of you also do math for a living of some sort. This is not a good thing. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. I talked in a lot of my shows about some of the alt-right ideology that's taken root in this country. And as, somebody who's that demographic and has a beard like this, I feel it's kind of important for me to talk about this kind of stuff. The Proud Boys, I guess, have been getting a lot of airplay, and the fascist right continues to show up in my news feed, and their constant, I don't know, what the pushing, all that they get, the extra publicity from Fox News and the talking points. Apparently, Laura Ingraham this last week went straight up on, that you will not replace us kind of talk. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. Unfortunately, in this, Israel is clamping down on external dissident speech. I've seen this in a couple stories, and this kind of stuff bothers me. We'll talk a little bit more about why and some of that. We've got some immigration update. Apparently there were some fireworks in the White House today. We'll talk a little bit about that. We've had stuff that's happened recently, like a 2-year-old showing up to represent herself in court as someone who's been the parent of a 2-year-old. The ridiculousness and over-the-top lack of morality in this situation is bothersome. We'll talk a little bit more about that. And Pimp Guy Died. So I believe his name was Dennis Hoff. If you ever had HBO and were a teenager back in the 90s, or whatever, 80s, one of those decades, there's this show on HBO called Cat House. And it was about these legal brothels, which, was something that HBO liked to do with kind of that pretty softcore stuff. Pseudo-softcore. And he was in a lot of those. He was the guy who ran those. He was a pimp, literally. A legal pimp. He died in his sleep after a rally. He's up for running for the Senate in Nevada. And running on, as they say now, a Trump-style campaign. And he died in his sleep, unfortunately, for someone. But no, so we'll see. I guess the rules there, he stays on the ballot. And if he wins, the seat stays empty. So they've got plenty of seats, I guess, in their legislature. All right, back to the front. Back to the front. Back to the front. Whew! All right. This has been a little bit of a whirlwind on this stuff this week, and I wanted to talk about this real quick, just as the quick idea, because it seemed kind of popular amongst some of my friends, so I figured I'd share it and immortalize it in video. I do think it would not be a bad idea for us to levy, say, a 10% tax on all the churches and clergy here in the country in order to directly fund universal health care to the degree that it's possible. And so I think that you could almost put that in legislative text, and then after the Supreme Court stops being this ridiculous right-wing conservative consortium, then maybe these laws would stick. So it's kind of a long-term kind of goal thing. I think it's something worth thinking about. I mean, the idea of what churches exist for, and I understand a number of positive aspects they play. I actually make this argument for churches amongst a number of atheist hardliners, so to speak. So I do think there's definitely positive aspects to it. Remember, it's kind of like a better car, not that they don't have a car. But I do think it's time to kind of start to think about this a little bit more, especially because we've seen real quick with the Trump administration and the changes that they're making to the way the IRS functions anyway, that they're going to be able to participate in political speech and kind of cease to be, in some senses, there's going to be some curious churches that pop up that spend a lot of money buying ads on TV for political reasons. So we'll see some of that coming up. So anyway, I do think that's worthwhile. So this week in fascism, guys, this is real. I can't quite stress this enough. This notion, and that's kind of the thing, the lies, and what will they not lie about? And when you allow these little lies to pass and to go, and then all of a sudden they're like, well, he says they don't know, and maybe it was wandering street rogues who disappeared this guy. I mean, it happens all the time. I mean, where was this, Turkey? Yeah, who knows? Isn't that kind of shithole country? People, if you let them lie, and the lies can get away from it, it leads to this kind of situation. And it's pretty clear. I mean, there's a lot of... It's pretty clear there's Trump business ties to Saudi. I think anybody who's in that kind of business and needs money at a certain point in time is going to have some ties to somebody in Saudi Arabia, because... Pardon. A lot of that family has really nothing but money, especially when times are good. And actually, times are not horrible for them right now. But so we have business ties there. They've actually literally mentioned this arms deal that's quite large and not quite, I guess, finalized yet. These things take a long time to do and go through a number of government agencies. So it's not a done deal yet by any measure, and that's the idea. This is kind of one of those things that can kill these kind of big deals. When you're talking about $100 billion deal, there's a lot of commissions on the line, and a lot of people are willing to look different ways for certain things in order to keep that flowing. So that's one of the things that you're running up to now. This is like really like, I mean, there's a number of movies I think that kind of follow these kind of political murder kind of storylines, but this is a real one. The president tying this into Kavanaugh was so ridiculous, and his notion that Kavanaugh was somehow proven innocent over this is just another one of those just gaslight lies that we got to make sure and not let really pass. I'm hoping to see a House investigation on Homeboy there, and now this is another one of those things that just to get the tax returns, just to start to look at where this kind of bias beyond the oath of office, right? Where you have this situation where who is it that you're protecting here from this desk that you sit upon or put your Diet Coke upon? So this is bad. So apparently there's latest from what I've seen from some headlines, they're setting up some fall guy to do this, and it'll be a rogue operation of some sort. And moving on, they'll try. There's probably going to be a little bit more repercussions for this. And as a number of people have noted, outside of a lot of rooms of power, the people who, are accused of this are not particularly popular. So we'll see how that plays out. This is a real story, though, and really quite dangerous. And I'll mention a little bit later kind of one of the aspects of it. But again, that's that thing. If they can lie about how many people are in a crowd or any of the hundreds of thousands of lies that they've told, if you just let it go, then this is where they can start to lie about this too. They lied about their child separation policy, and now they're talking about bringing it back, and we'll talk about that some more later. So the fiscal year-end results, deficit's up by 17%, $779 billion, with a humming, for the moment, economy and full employment. The Republicans are now going, what? Where are these? Nobody can know where these deficits are coming from. It's just so strange. They kind of show up, and nobody knows where they came from. And maybe, I guess we're just gonna have to, cut Social Security, because I don't know, how else can we possibly deal with the debt? And, unless those Democrats want to help, cut Social Security, it's just not fair for Republicans to have to do this all by themselves when nobody knows where these deficits came from, right? And it's obviously Social Security spending. And I don't remember any tax cuts we just passed and claimed that they would pay for themselves, if not more. The same guy, and that was my bad Mitch McConnell. Sorry, I can do a good Mitch McConnell sometimes, but I don't know, you get the camera rolling. Nobody knows. Nobody's just kind of that turtle guy. And nobody knows. Yeah, not hitting it. But they cut taxes and then turn around and say, well, where did these deficits come from? We're going to have to cut services, and they're just blatant about it. It was early in March, and they've got one of this, and there's a story I was actually reading that did a good job, and more news stories are now going back 6 months to be like, wait, what did this guy say was going to happen? Oh yeah, he said these tax cuts would pay for themselves, if not extra. And instead of seeing tax cuts that pay for themselves, if not extra, you see a deficit exploding with full employment. This is why they're so scared of interest rates going up. And because when you have this exploding deficit, all this extra money, this $800 billion, the extra 0.25% that goes into that, and some of the reasons why you have to raise those rates in certain markets is to get people to buy them. The people who are buying this, there's a lot of Americans doing this through a lot of institutions. And I don't know current percentages on who's currently buying U.S. debt, but there's a lot of Americans that are doing it, but other countries and a lot of the buyers of that debt externally, when they pull out of the market, China, Russia, people who we're kind of feuding with, you have to raise interest rates in order to entice them to continue to participate in the way this works. So that's one of the reasons why the interest rates have to go up. to keep things under control, so they don't have to just continue to offer more to cover it. So it's going to get interesting. By the way, right before this last recess, the Republican House passed even more tax cuts, and they finalized what they wanted to originally do, but couldn't because of the rules of the Senate, because the tax cut they wanted to pass was so big, they would have had to have 60 votes in the Senate, which they could never get, so they used reconciliation, so they could only do it at 10%. So they tried to pass, and even while we're having this exploding deficit, Paul Ryan and his House Republicans cut the taxes more. They don't ideologically believe, konnichiwa. Actually, it's funny that you're on here, and then right before you, my other only, like, so I randomly added a Japanese politician when he was here with Abe, and he showed up, so I guess, good morning. That's pretty awesome. I love our world. I saw I got your driver's license the other day, so congratulations, Case. That's pretty awesome, dude. It's great to see you thriving. Anyway, where was I? Oh yeah, tax cuts. It didn't even go to the Senate because it had no chance. So to get a little bit more serious back on this other thing with this right wing ideology stuff, it's hard to see this happening because so much of this is just such a difficult, like, cultural thing. It's so the move, like, and this is kind of starts a weird place to start with this, but the move from privilege to equality feels like oppression. And when somebody tells you that you're being oppressed and you're in a group, that helps make that group bond together and look for direction for either to retain and go back to that status or something else. And remember, if you will, a few shows ago, I was talking about this concept of male fragility and the reality of it. And if you want to go back, it's some good stuff. Anyway, whatever. But so that's those two things kind of put together is why you see the movements like these kind of this fascist right and these guys standing up and being they're real men kind of thing. I mean, so much, and I guess we're far enough away from Fight Club being out that they don't see kind of how obvious this is. So I don't know that there's a better solution out there, especially as excuse me. We've seen, I don't know what else a lot of these guys are going to do. Because we see, and there's a lot less, and this is what goes back to kind of the birth rate, family size thing. Because one of the things that keeps people, in line, so to speak, society-wise, is that family kind of structure. And as that becomes less of an impediment to doing whatever the hell you want, we'll see how it goes. And it becomes harder to fund education in those kind of situations too. These are kind of weird, subtle societal effects. If you're wondering why these things are losing out, that's part of the reason why, because there's less people who are affected by them losing out. So one of the things that's really scary about these kind of fascist groups coming up is their pledges for violence, and then you mix that with a government that currently, right now, is losing political support and also looking the other way from murder, right? Who's already gone with the very fine people in response to somebody running somebody down with a car, right? And it's worthy enough, I think, to be aware of that this is we're that kind of close to this. And I guess I'm kind of beating the dead horse, but I'm trying to just be like, come on, man, wake up. We're close, so vote. And then hopefully we can dismantle this and see how close we got, rather than lose this election and go over some really, really bad edges we're very, very close to. I mean, on a midterm, it's just wild. We are very close to a bad edge. It says it right there. Israel clamping down on dissident speech. They've done this, and they detained this student. I talked about this a little bit before. The 22-year-old Al-Qassam, during her trial, said she no longer supports the pro-Palestinian boycott, divest, sanction, BDS movement, adding her decision to attend an Israeli university for graduate school shows that she has changed her position on the country. She was held under a new law that bans foreign citizens from entering Israel if they have participated in or supported a boycott against the country or its West Bank settlements. So this is one of the things that, and a lot of people who have seen this as a large injustice, generational injustice over the years for the occupation and the division of Israel, I guess, this boycott movement has become one of those very peaceful, resistant movements that, because of its kind of just straightforwardness, like, well, we disagree with what you're doing, so we're going to try and not support you economically. Cool. And now it's like, no, that's not cool. You can't do that. And visit here. Now, the thing that's dangerous and that scares me about this is, one, it doesn't take too much for that to come here quickly. And especially if you have an administration that, A, is wildly close to the more radical elements of the Israeli government, and also wants to shut down what they see as left-wing institutions and universities, which is where a lot of this stuff happens. And if you can bring that wedge in and say, well, if you guys support this, you can't be funded here. It's actually illegal to do that now, and we consider these kind of movements to be anti-Semitic. And I'm not actually even going hyperbole. That's actually something that actually kind of comes up when you're talking about these movements in some of the U.S. law. To get around our free speech, they call these movements hate speech, which is to me, gets very dangerous territory. I just want to keep an eye on that, because it's odd. They actually did hold this student, and I'm sure that my public statements would probably keep me from being able to visit, because I've been more than critical, I think, in the past. I think I've actually met a number of folks in there, and I think they've been great people. Everybody that I meet, but I don't agree with this policy. It's kind of one of those things too. Most of the Americans that I hang out with are not Donald Trump, but that's what the country looks like right now. So anyway, and there was another lawsuit against people in New Zealand who had worked to keep Lorde, I guess, is a music singer of the younger generation, Lorde, from going and doing a concert there, and they sued and they found them guilty of causing economic damage through this illegal boycott, and whoever they held liable now is on the hook in some Israeli book for several, like $12,000 or something. I mean, this kind of stuff, I hate to see it when we have a situation where we don't have our government here being like, hey guys, back off a little bit, which I think should kind of be a lot of our stance to when we see this kind of stuff, and instead we're seeing, whatever dude, we don't care, America first. It's like, well, in what? What? Our immigration update. So there was that, like I mentioned, a 2-year-old in court. This is something that was going to happen from the child separation stuff, and now we've actually seen this show up more than once. It's absurd. I'm not going to go over the top on that tonight because I don't have it right now. I'm just tired. But we have to stop this, and what we can do now is vote. So let's do this. Bolton versus Kelly and Kirsten. Apparently they got into this shouting match. So this last month at the border, they broke a record for the number of people who crossed it and were apprehended, like a long-term record. And this, of course, set off crazy, again, the racist bigot president that we have. And Fox News apparently is going nuts about some caravan of people who were coming to request asylum at the border because their situation is so desperate, and somebody told them, or they read in some book somewhere, that the United States was this great country that could somehow figure out a way to bring in a number of some people who want to just work hard and have a decent life and the basic, simple infrastructure of stability in society, just want to exist. And it's so frustrating to see. So they're freaking out, and his whole thing about going down to the border and shutting down the border is a bunch of bullshit. First off, you can't really do it for this. It doesn't make any sense. These people are coming to present themselves to request asylum. His notion that this is an invasion is xenophobic, like racist bullshit. That's what it is. I don't think it should be called anything else in legitimate news sources. But that's what they fought over. And so now, and this is where things get really nasty and scary, because they're finding that their thinking is that they're not being cruel enough. Right? They're not, like, people still think that they can come to the U.S. and not be treated like absolute dirt that's hated. And that's what the impression that they think that they can give that's going to change this flow. And I mean, they had record border crossings. We're freaking out because of this caravan. And then you have this idea that somehow cutting aid to these countries will stop immigration flows. And it's the situation why people are willing to put themselves in these kind of desperate places is because they come from desperate places. And it's still just a way to maybe find something that's a little bit better out there. They're desperate people, refugees looking for asylum. And this is the thing, too. They're talking about the size of this caravan, and it's like 4,000 people, and he's freaking out. And it looks like we might be seeing waves from Venezuela if they can go all the way up. I don't know what's going to happen there, but in the tens of thousands and hundreds of thousands. Like, they're apparently, from what I've read, and I haven't updated this a little in last week or two, but millions of people who are fleeing what's happening in Venezuela. And the only thing that Republicans can think about to do is be like, he told you it's socialism. So, you know, the idea that this is somehow going to be a way for the U.S. to shine as an example for how the world deals with other people totally screwing shit up, which isn't, for me, what I see is socialism down there so much as totalitarianism. I do think that the idea of nationalizing everything is a bad idea, especially if you don't have good people to actually do things, which then screws things up. And then watching all of Venezuela deteriorate was a whole nother story. But I think that has to do more with authoritarianism and having that kind of power than it does with the particular ideology that you try and implement with it. But so we haven't even seen those big waves yet. So what they're trying to do with these record numbers of what we're currently seeing is you're going to see more camps. You're seeing more courts where they're trying to force through more people in higher rates. There's some really, really evil spreadsheets out there being tallied. And vote! Pimp Guy Died. I'm about done. He's still on the ballot. So, in closing tonight, this show is called Escaping Dystopia, and it's called that for a reason, because I'm like a freak, and I'm, you know, whatever. I like words, and there's actually a band, I guess, so... Not the first person to put those two words together. But this week, you saw, hopefully, kind of what I'm talking about. Like, this happened in Turkey. It hasn't happened here yet. It hasn't happened to us yet. It's not a journalist that you know being disappeared by the government. It's a journalist that just lived here, that was critical of another government that got disappeared. So this is a big thing. This is not some random whatever. This is making a point. You do this to make a point to other people who are like that person that you chopped up. So the response has to make a point as well, or you've just been punctured and you're something different than you used to be. So, I mean, we've known for a long time that the country is going to change with this kind of leadership, we'll call it for the moment, facetiously. But this is how bad we can look. So, with that, vote. If you're from Colorado, you should have a ballot in the mail. It will come to you. If not, go register. You will then be able to vote. You can do this up until the day of an election because people in Colorado think you should be able to vote. Other places you have already passed your time to register. And in other places, even if you try and register, they will reject you because you are likely to vote for a Democrat and they are Republicans, and that's the only way they can win now is to cheat. And they will cheat. So stop voting for Republicans. Alright. That, I'm going to say good evening. Thank you very much. And good night. We'll definitely do a show next week. We've got 3 weeks till an election. So, peace out. Thanks everybody who dropped by. Always nice to have you. All the world away. Pretty cool. And with that, I say good evening and adieu. And all that jazz. So, peace out and vote. Good night.